Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. PSG made an emphatic statement at Old Trafford this evening, beating Manchester United 2-0 without Edinson Cavani and Neymar. How do they do it? Where did Manchester United go wrong? Don't worry, here at the interviews, we've got you covered. So on this edition of the interviews, we're going to briefly break down how PSG beat Manchester United. So before we get into today's video, don't forget to give our video a thumbs up if you do enjoy it. The bell below does give you daily notifications regarding our organic, unfiltered soccer/footy analysis. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. In today's video, we're going to break down the first half, see how both sides had to approach the game and how they canceled each other out, and then move to the second half and see how PSG were able to gain two valuable away goals. But first, let's get to the starting lineups. We look at Manchester United. No real surprises. 4-3-3. Martial, Rashford, and Lingard up front. In midfield, Ander Herrera and Paul Pogba ahead of Nemanja Matic. Then we looked at PSG, 3-4-2-1. We will get to how their system worked in a bit, but they were more of a 3-4-2-1 with Mbappe ahead of Draxler and Di Maria. Out in the wing-back roles, Dani Alves and Juan Bernat, and in midfield, Marquinhos and Verratti. So now let's get to the first half, see how both sides look to approach the game, and why the two sides canceled each other out in the opening 45 minutes. So when we look at Manchester United against PSG, the first thing that has to be said is that the first half was very sloppy, very poor in terms of quality. Manchester United never really tested Gigi Buffon, but their approach did make sense in the earlier stages. They wanted to inflict their energy onto this PSG side, try to force them into some errors, and pounce and get an early lead. What they did was that PSG was a back three when they did have possession. They pushed the front three out to them in Lingard, on Kimpembe. They had Martial with Carrera, and they had Rashford stepping to Thiago Silva. They then had Pogba on Marquinhos. They had Herrera sticking to Verratti, and they pushed the fullbacks out to the wingbacks. That was how they were going about their business. PSG struggled to create chances from deeper positions. They struggled to really build out of the back, and that was a decent ploy from PSG in the earlier stages. More so, when they did have the wider players and the fullbacks kind of dropping off, we did see the switches where we had Pogba move out, two-step to Bernat, and then you would have Matic step up to the midfield to ensure that they were closed down in those wider areas. So even if Di Maria pushed out, they were able to pull Ashley Young into that position, and vice versa with Luke Shaw. So they were very composed in that situation. PSG struggled to create and build chances from the back, and they often did have to go long. And the problem here was that despite Mbappe's speed, he doesn't really offer an aerial threat to win those 50-50 duels with Lindelof or Bailly. So that is how they look to really struggle, really frustrate PSG. And the thing about that is that you're unable to sustain that sort of pressure for the entire game. But United did have the ball. The problem here is that when United did have the ball, you had Lingard kind of tucking into those narrow positions in central areas. Martial was out wide, but he never really got onto it. And what happened here, and what was interesting about PSG's approach, is that when they didn't have possession, they ended up dropping into a more so of a 4-4-2 with Draxler and Mbappe kind of sitting near Matic. They had the midfield battle there, and then they were able to pull Dani Alves and Juan Bernat into those wider, or Di Maria actually, into those wider areas, two-step to the fullbacks, and Bernat tucked in as Kimpembe moved to the center of the pitch. That ensured that they had the 4v3 battle in that situation. They were able to ensure that they were controlled in midfield. They allowed Matic to kind of spray passes together, but they did have some pressure there, and they were trying to ensure that Shaw and Young couldn't get forward. But as the half wore on, we saw Young get into good positions via ball switches, delivering cross into the box that no one really attacked. That was one of the issues that United did have. They had Shaw trying to get the overload. There was one in particular where they were able to split. Martial was able to split the two, and Shaw was able to get the ball on the overload. But when he pulled the ball back for Rashford, Kimpembe came across. So that was where United were trying to do, but that was PSG's shape in a nutshell. When they dropped off, they dropped into more of a two banks of forward, ensure that they were able to really place themselves across the pitch and have those battles to ensure that United didn't have any overloads. But when PSG did push forward, they did move more into that 3-4-2-1, which kind of made sense because what they wanted to do here was they wanted Dani Alves to push forward as a right wing back. They wanted Bernat to push forward, and like we saw in previous matches, more so the Spurs against United match, when you're able to push your attack-minded fullbacks forward, that does leave gaps in the wider areas. And Thomas Tuchel didn't want Rashford or Martial spinning out into those areas to offer threats in the channel. So what happened now is that you have Thiago Silva and you have Kimpembe and Carrera, athletic defenders that are able to keep up with that pace and to ensure that they mark out those spaces so there's no vacant runs for Martial or Rashford there. With that being said, you push those two a bit higher. Bernat's positioning was a bit cautious until towards the end of the first half. But what we did notice here was that you have Matic, and what you're supposed to have now is Pogba and Herrera stepping to Verratti and Marquinhos. But the one issue here, and this is what PSG looked to probably try to exploit, was you have Matic sitting here and you have Di Maria and Draxler in narrow positions, both trying to overload those spaces in wider areas to get on the ball. But PSG were unable to do that for large spells of the first half because they couldn't build out of their half. So that was a big issue there. But that is kind of what PSG were trying to do. And as the game wore on, United dropped off a bit deeper in that first half and they became more of a 4-5-1. The issue here with that 4-5-1 was that they were very focused on limiting space between the lines, which is understandable because they didn't want Draxler or Di Maria to get the ball in that space. And what was good about them was that although the wingbacks did push forward, and they had Di Maria and Draxler in that space, you had Martial and you had Lingard kind of cutting off those passing lanes. The problem here was that Verratti was able to get on the ball and really dictate and control the tempo, and he did a very good job there. And Marquinhos was, although he misplaced a few passes, he was reliable. But Marquinhos' big role throughout this game was the fact that he stuck on Paul Pogba at every opportunity that he could, ensuring that whenever Pogba got the ball, Marquinhos was tight on him, shadowed him across the pitch, and Pogba's influence was negated, and that was key for what PSG were trying to do there. Yes, United did have chances on the counterattack, two in particular that come to mind. Rashford around the box, not being able to play the final pass. You had Lingard pushing forward on a break and switching the ball out to Martial, but Martial lapsed and he was unable to control the ball. But that is where really this game sprung in the first half. PSG had the better chances. When you think about it, the two things that really came to mind was, one, they were able to have a lot of time on the ball in possession, and United weren't closing down quick enough. One of their better opportunities saw Verratti just simply locate Draxler running off Paul Pogba. He's able to play the pass across Pogba for Draxler. And then what happens there is that you have Mbappe running in behind Bailly diagonally, and you have Draxler split Lindelof, and he was able to split Shaw for Mbappe to get that ball 1v1 with David De Gea. De Gea comes out, but Mbappe squanders his shot inches wide of the net. But again, just not closing down. If they're sitting in this position, I know they want to keep the lines really compact, but Pogba and Herrera have to kind of step out there in those situations when you're protecting your box, because you can't give a player like Verratti time in those positions. Or if you do that, Pogba has to track the run there. We look at the other opportunities that they do have to come to mind, and it all stems through Mbappe. Mbappe's pace was really causing United a threat besides the start-stop pattern in this game. One of the opportunities is just simply Matic playing a pass into Martial and Carrera steps in, and with Shaw stepping in towards him, you have Mbappe instantly make that run across, and he drags out Lindelof, but takes his first touch around Lindelof. The problem is that his second touch was a bit poor, and the only thing that he could revert to was a cross that was blocked. The other opportunity was from that Shaw overload. You had Kimpembe intercept the ball. It falls to Marquinhos. He instantly plays it into Mbappe, who drags out Bailly and switches the ball to Di Maria. Di Maria gets it, and Young is ahead of him, and Di Maria plays the ball around Young. And what happens there is that although Young should get it, Mbappe's pace is so lightning quick, and he's able to get across before Young is able to push him down for a free kick and a booking. But when you break things down in the first half, United's pressing did make sense. They were unable to sustain it, and when they did get chances on the counterattack, they were very sloppy with their final ball, and nothing really stemmed from it. But PSG, the system changes made sense. They looked like they had a definitive ploy to break down United, but again, they were just seemed a bit one oriented in the way that they wanted to attack. Yes, Verratti and Marquinhos had the space in midfield, but Mbappe's pace was the key difference in that first half, but none of it led to goals. So now let's get to the second half, see how both sides look to approach the game, and with Lingard and Martial coming off due to injury, how Solsjkaer would react. When we look at the second half, the big change is obviously Alexis Sanchez and Juan Mata coming into the game. United lose their counter-attacking threat, more so the pace and the energy that they do get from Lingard and what they got from Martial, but they weren't playing well on the counter-attack. And one of the differences that you get now here is that Mata likes to tuck narrow to get on the ball. He was delivering crosses from wider areas when he got into those positions. Sanchez also likes to tuck into those narrow positions. So that was what they were really doing. But United's main threat basically came from Rashford making those diagonal runs in behind Kimpembe in that space, dragging out Thiago Silva on one occasion, Young clipping the ball over for Kimpembe and Rashford, and some may say that Kimpembe should have been sent off, but that is where they were really finding their joy, but nothing was really coming from it. Lots of crosses into the box that Thiago Silva and the center backs dealt with, and the good crosses that we often saw Rashford deliver from those areas weren't attacked. Like I said, this is where you feel like they did miss Romelu Lukaku, but they waited until late on to replace Rashford for Lukaku, and that was their only change that they had to kind of shake up the game. How did PSG approach this? Well, now when you do have that 4-5-1, you do know that you can kind of force Mata back. You can try and get that overload, but what they did differently was that now you had the center backs pushing up a bit higher. They were now getting involved in the play. The wing backs were higher as well. The center backs were extremely narrow in what they were doing in terms of trying to get into the ball, trying to force players out of position. And we kind of saw that in the build-up to the corner kick that was one that led to PSG's opener. And it was just simply Kimpembe and Thiago Silva baiting Rashford to press, and eventually what happens is that he does step into Kimpembe, and Kimpembe is able to pull off him. But before we even get to that, we see that from them. You see that the center backs are narrow. You see that they're looking to step forward and try and offer that penetration and pull markers out of position. You have Mbappe dropping off a bit deeper and trying to get on the ball. What also happened was that Di Maria and Draxler did often adopt higher positions. We saw Di Maria closer to Young. We saw Draxler kind of in between Shaw and Lindelof. And what they were doing was that when they did have an opening, they would drop to either side of Matic to get on the ball. And that was how they were now finding space to create those overloads and exploit him, being the sole pivot ahead of Pogba and ahead of Herrera, who did step a bit higher in somewhat of a 4-1-4-1, but they weren't really closing down Marquinhos and Verratti, whereas Marquinhos did stick tight to Pogba throughout that half. Like I said, with that being said, when you look at the build-up to the goal, it's simply him evading Rashford and then dropping the ball off to Draxler, who's now able to switch the ball out to Dani Alves, and his cross into the box is ahead of the center backs, but just behind Mbappe. He nods his effort on goal that's pushed away. The corner kick, we normally don't break that down here, but it was very key because, like I said, it was planned. Di Maria looks to get the ball to the far post. What was key here was Marquinhos and Thiago Silva drag out Lindelof and Bailly with near post runs. Pogba, the ball goes just over him, and Matic switches off, and Kimpembe is able to guide his effort past the keeper. But even when you look at other chances, they were able to break on the counterattack. Marquinhos winning the ball off Matic, flicking it out to the left channel for Di Maria to run 1v1 with Young. Nothing does stem from there but a corner kick. You saw after they took the 2-goal lead, a simple clearance. It does see the ball switched out from Di Maria across Shaw, who is higher, and Lindelof for Mbappe to break free 1v1 with De Gea, and that led to an opportunity that perhaps Mbappe should have scored. But even when we look into the build-up of the second goal, it just shows what PSG were all about. And again, at this time, it's Pogba being dispossessed. He was tracked by Alves, and he was tracked by Marquinhos. And what we see here now is what PSG are all about, because it even stems with Bernat getting involved in that play. Bernat ends up dragging out Ashley Young in this regard, and Ashley Young tracks him. But after Marquinhos wins that ball, he ends up playing it to Bernat, and Young doesn't really press, but again, we see him kind of step into that space. Now we see Herrera step to We see Herrera step to Verratti. Verratti's able to play the ball to Marquinhos, and we see Matic step there with Alexis Sanchez near him, and he drops the ball off to Kimpembe. But what happens now is that Young has to retreat his position, and as Young retreats his position, that leaves Bernat free because, again, Herrera and Matic are taking out of the game. Pogba's still in the stationary position, and once Bernat gets the ball, he slides it out to Angel Di Maria, who is in space with Young recovering, and you have Mbappe making the run in between the center backs. Great cross into the box, and Mbappe finishes it. But that is what PSG were doing very well, and United were getting sucked out and pulled out of position, and that was pivotal. And then we look to one more opportunity again. You just kind of see it. No real press on Verratti. Herrera comes late. He's able to split Pogba and Herrera. And what happens there is that it's Draxler this time, again, dropping off a bit deeper. And when Draxler drops off a bit deeper, what does he notice? Mbappe trying to pull out Ashley Young. And what happens there? Young doesn't know whether to go to Mbappe or Bernat because Mata isn't tracking the run. Another issue that United had. Ball played in, Mbappe backheels it to Bernat, who breaks into that half space, forces De Gea into a save. Besides that, PSG dropped off into more of a 4-5-1 as the game wore on. They brought on Paredes. They ended up making a few more substitutions, but besides that, United didn't really have anything to pull towards but hopeless crosses into the box, and the fact that Lukaku came on a bit too late, whereas PSG got their system right, made a few changes, were very flexible, shut Paul Pogba out of the game with Marquinhos, and were fully valued of this win and the 2 away goals without their key players in Cavani and in Neymar. But let me know what you guys think. Can United rescue this at the Parc des Princes in the second leg? And what about PSG? Do they need Cavani and Neymar in the second leg? Are they favorites to win this competition? Meet me in the comments below. Don't forget I upload videos every day, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And that was your daily dose of the interviews.